logo, dark V beta, text-to-speech, images, API plans, community support account 0, $8,000 nodos, title, write your script here, 32 créditos diarios, 0 créditos, search by text or title. Done. S20. The air in the Grand Hall of the International Historical Congress was thick, not merely with the sex and soothing narrator. Done. S19. The air in the archival lab had been thick with the hum of sophisticated machinery, a constant white. Soothing narrator. Done. S18. The air in the grand auditorium hung heavy with an almost palpable tension, a hushed reverence that soothing narrator. Done. S17. The air in the restoration studio hung thick with the scent of aged linseed oil and delicate solvent. Soothing narrator. Done. S16. The hushed reverence of the archival laboratory was a sanctuary of forgotten time. A place where the soothing narrator. Processing. S15. The air in Chamber 7 was always still, heavy with the scent of aged parchment and the faint metalli. Soothing narrator. Done. S14. The hum of the high-resolution scanner was usually a soothing, almost meditative sound. A backdrop. T. Soothing narrator. Processing. S13. The old photograph lay on the light table, its sepia tones whispering stories of a bygone era. Elias. Soothing narrator. Done. S12. The air in the art conservation lab hummed, a sterile symphony of filtered air and hushed anticipati. Soothing narrator. Done. S11. The year 1880 gifted the world a portrait that would for generations be hailed as an undisputed mast. Soothing narrator. 1 to 10 of 10 1 of 1, items per page 50 created. 27/11, 2025, 17, 30. Updated, 27/11, 2025, 17, 30. Size 45, 325 characters. The air in Chamber 7 was always still, heavy with the scent of aged parchment and the faint metallic tang of sterile tools. For decades it had been a sanctuary of quiet reverence, where time-worn objects surrendered their secrets under the gentle, discerning touch of the world's foremost conservators. Today, however, that familiar stillness was about to shatter, though none of us in the room knew it yet. My gloved fingers, accustomed to the delicate dance across fragile surfaces, moved with practiced precision over the ancient tapestry, its threads a kaleidoscope of faded histories. This was the orbicular tapestry, a revered masterpiece, an icon of the Third Dynasty and the crown jewel of the Grand Repository's collection. Centuries of scholarly consensus had etched its narrative into the very fabric of our understanding of that epoch. Every motif, every color, every stitch had been analyzed, categorized, and interpreted, forming an unshakable bedrock of historical truth. My focus, typically an unyielding laser, faltered. A tremor, almost imperceptible, ran through my concentration. Beneath the accumulated grime of ages, a subtle irregularity had begun to emerge. It wasn't a stain, nor a tear, nor a natural imperfection in the weave. It was a faint whisper of something else, a pattern that defied all known iconography of the period. My breath hitched, a silent internal gasp. My analytical mind, honed by years of meticulous restoration and an unyielding commitment to objective truth, registered the anomaly with a calm exterior. Yet deep within, a primal premonition stirred, a cold certainty that what I was seeing was not merely an overlooked detail, but a profound betrayal. A betrayal of the narratives we had so carefully constructed, a silent challenge to the very foundation of understanding this artifact, and by extension, an entire civilization. This wasn't just about a small mark on an old textile. This was about the colossal weight of history, the inertia of accepted wisdom. The true antagonist here was not a person, but the entrenched historical consensus itself, the collective intellectual edifice that had allowed this truth to remain hidden for so long, obscured by layers of assumption and the comforting familiarity of the known. The implications, even at this nascent stage, felt immense, almost suffocating. This tiny, nascent detail, barely visible beneath the careful sweep of my brush, held the power to unravel entire chapters of history, to rewrite textbooks, to challenge the very identity of a people who had long drawn their heritage from the stories woven into this very tapestry. The orbicular tapestry wasn't merely an artwork. It was a cultural anchor. Housed within the hallowed halls of the Royal Museum of Antiquities, it commanded its own wing, its own dedicated team of security and preservation specialists. Generations of renowned scholars, from the pioneering Dr. Eleanor Vance in the late 19th century to the contemporary Professor Alistair Finch, had dedicated their lives to its study. Their dissertations, monographs, and lectures had shaped the public's perception and the academic community's understanding of the Third Dynasty. The tapestry depicted scenes of royal life, religious ceremonies, and mythical battles, each interpreted through a lens that perfectly aligned with the prevailing historical narrative of a peaceful, agrarian society. To question the tapestry was to question the very pillars of that established history. The conservation lab itself was a temple of quiet diligence. Every morning, the same ritual unfolded: sterilized gowns, masks, gloves, calibrated lighting, temperature, humidity. Each tool, from the ultrasonic mister to the finest sable brush, had its place, its purpose. The atmosphere was one of profound reverence, a silent respect for the fragility of the past. Handling such a priceless object was not merely a job. It was a sacred trust, a guardianship of human heritage. My position as lead conservator for ancient textiles came with immense prestige, but also an inherent pressure. My reputation, like that of many in this specialized field, was built not on radical discovery, but on the meticulous preservation and subtle reaffirmation of existing knowledge. We were the custodians of history, not its revolutionaries. Within the intricate social circles of this academic ecosystem, radical discoveries were often met not with immediate celebration, but with deep skepticism, sometimes even quiet disdain. Careers flourished by expanding upon established theories, by adding intricate footnotes to accepted truths. To propose something that fundamentally contradicted centuries of interpretation was, frankly, career suicide for many. It meant challenging the legacies of revered professors, undermining the very foundations upon which institutions had been built. This environment, subtle yet pervasive, had inadvertently become the perfect shroud for the symbol I was now seeing. It was a world where institutional inertia, intellectual comfort, and the deep-seated human resistance to change had silently conspired to keep this truth hidden, woven into the very fabric of the tapestry, waiting patiently for a touch sensitive enough and a mind open enough to truly see it. The faint mark seemed to shimmer under the focused light, an almost defiant assertion of its own existence, a silent scream against the centuries of scholarly silence that had enveloped it. The silence was about to break. The faint anomaly, barely a whisper on the ancient surface, was not the first time the artifact had hinted at secrets. Decades, even centuries of academic scrutiny had layered interpretations upon interpretations, creating a dense tapestry of accepted truth that, in hindsight, sometimes felt more like a shroud. Within the hallowed halls of the institution, and indeed across the broader academic landscape, the artifact was not merely an object, it was a battleground of ideas, a silent arbiter of reputations. There were the traditionalists, those who had built their formidable careers on the very interpretations now potentially threatened. And then there were the revisionists, often younger, often marginalized, whose nuanced arguments had, for generations, been met with a quiet, yet firm, dismissal. This was the deep-seated tension, the unspoken family dynamic that permeated every discussion, every analysis of the relic. We knew, from the dusty archives and hushed conversations, that past attempts to clean or study the image had often brushed against these very inconsistencies. In the 1930s, a rudimentary X-ray had revealed an unexpected density beneath a painted layer, quickly attributed to a later repair, a clumsy patch-up by a medieval restorer. In the 1970s, a pioneering photographic technique, still primitive by today's standards, had captured a faint, almost ghost-like pattern dismissed as a trick of light, an artifact of the developing process itself. These were not malicious omissions, but rather the product of their time. Limited technology, prevailing biases that sought to confirm rather than challenge, and perhaps a lack of the specific interdisciplinary expertise that our current team embodied. The academic community, much like any family, had its old hurts, its ingrained habits. Long-standing rivalries between schools of thought meant that a finding from one camp, especially if it challenged the bedrock theories of another, would often be met with skepticism, if not outright scorn, regardless of its merit. Dogmatic adherence to the interpretations of influential, often deceased, scholars became the path of least resistance, a safer ground than venturing into radical, career-threatening reevaluations. These weren't just theoretical skirmishes. They manifested in painful silences and subtle suppressions. Junior scholars who dared to present minor discrepancies in their doctoral theses were quietly advised to reconsider their focus, lest they undermine the work of their esteemed mentors. Outsiders, often independent researchers or those from less prestigious institutions whose analyses hinted at something beyond the accepted narrative, found their papers languishing in peer review, or worse, published in obscure journals where they would gather dust, unread by the mainstream. There were the broken promises, too, of thorough re-examinations that never fully materialized. Funding proposals for deeper, more intrusive analysis of the artifact were often redirected to projects that reinforced the status quo, deemed less speculative or more aligned with established research priorities. The institution, proud of its heritage and its custodianship of such a significant object, had inadvertently cultivated an environment where radical discovery was not necessarily celebrated, but rather viewed with a cautious, almost fearful, apprehension. This subtle, almost imperceptible erosion of open inquiry had been a slow, insidious process over several decades. It wasn't about deliberate deception, but about the comfort of the known, the inertia of established power structures. Access to the artifact itself became a privilege, granted sparingly and primarily to those whose research trajectories were already well defined within the accepted framework. Publication opportunities in prestigious journals were often controlled by editorial boards dominated by the very scholars whose interpretations stood to be challenged. This manipulative behavior, while rarely overt, created an unspoken pressure, a self-censorship, among those who wished to advance their careers. The promise of genuine, unfettered reevaluation, so often touted in public statements, became little more than a hollow echo within the lab's inner sanctum. The prevailing paradigm, once a vibrant framework for understanding, had slowly calcified into an impenetrable shell, guarding its secrets not with locks and alarms, but with the far more formidable defenses of academic inertia and institutional pride. The symbol, whatever it was, had been silently hidden in plain sight, shrouded by layers of dust, varnish, and, most powerfully, by the collective weight of what everyone believed to be true. It was a testament to the quiet power of omission, setting the perfect stage for its long, agonizing concealment. As the meticulous cleaning project continued its relentless, painstaking advance, the initial anomaly, once a mere whisper on the aged surface, began to assert itself with an undeniable insistence. What had first appeared as a curious discoloration, a trick of light, or perhaps an ancient stain, slowly, methodically, resolved into something far more deliberate. Each microscopic flake of grime removed, each layer of accreted varnish delicately lifted, served to sharpen its edges, deepen its contours, and reveal its unmistakable intentionality. It was no longer a flaw, but a mark, a symbol carefully, purposefully etched into the very fabric of the artifact, hidden beneath centuries of neglect and prior, less advanced, conservation attempts. This growing clarity ignited a profound intellectual conflict within the expert conservation team. What had begun as a shared scientific curiosity, a collective intrigue over a minor puzzle, swiftly morphed into a series of intense discussions, then debates, and eventually heated arguments. Dr. Eris Thorne, the lead conservator, found himself navigating a tempest of conflicting interpretations. Some of his junior colleagues, their eyes bright with the thrill of discovery, championed the immediate announcement of a new finding, eager to challenge the established narrative. Others, especially the more seasoned members, steeped in the institution's conservative traditions, urged extreme caution, questioning the symbol's authenticity, suggesting it might be a later edition, or even a sophisticated forgery that had escaped detection. The air in the lab, once thick with the quiet hum of equipment and focused breathing, now vibrated with the tension of clashing intellects and burgeoning anxieties. These internal tensions, however, were merely the prelude to a far greater storm brewing on the horizon. The debates within the lab quickly began to transcend mere academic disagreement, hinting at external social pressures that started to mount with an almost imperceptible yet suffocating force. Whispers, initially confined to the hushed corridors of the museum, began to reach the ears of board members, influential donors, and even the cautious representatives of funding institutions. The expectation was clear. This revered artifact was meant to confirm existing history, to reinforce the established narrative, not to radically disrupt it. The very idea of a concealed symbol, one that could potentially unravel entire chapters of accepted understanding, was met with a polite, yet chilling, resistance. The psychological environment within the lab and the broader institution became noticeably heavy, burdened by the immense responsibility that weighed upon every member of the team. Each conservator felt the invisible eyes of the academic world, the public, and the institution itself, scrutinizing their every move. The potential for a paradigm shift, while exhilarating to the truly open-minded, was terrifying to those whose careers, reputations, and even identities were inextricably linked to the old narrative. The very air felt thick with unspoken anxieties, the fear of misinterpretation, the dread of professional backlash, and the daunting prospect of challenging a consensus that had stood for generations. Subtle judgments from peers, initially just fleeting glances or carefully worded questions in academic forums, began to surface with increasing frequency. Conversations in academic corridors, once friendly exchanges, now carried an undertone of suspicion. Rumors of unorthodox findings and the possibility of a concealed symbol started to spread beyond the immediate team, reaching wider academic circles and even prompting cautious inquiries from media outlets. A prominent historical society, known for its staunch defense of traditional interpretations, published an op-ed subtly questioning the overzealous tendencies of modern conservation science, a thinly veiled jab at Thorne's team. An article in a national newspaper, framed as a feature on the museum's conservation efforts, included a paragraph that highlighted the delicate balance between preservation and speculative interpretation, a phrase that resonated with an uncomfortable warning. These external pressures were not yet direct attacks, but they formed a pervasive, insidious atmosphere of doubt and scrutiny. Thorne found himself fielding more calls from the museum director, each conversation laced with an unspoken plea for reassurance, a desire for the team to find nothing that would upset the delicate institutional apple cart. He noticed a shift in the way his colleagues from other departments interacted with his team, a new distance, a guarded politeness that felt colder than outright hostility. The world outside the lab, a world that had long viewed the artifact through a singular, unchanging lens, was starting to sense the tremor. The ground beneath the established historical narrative was beginning to crack, and the small, dedicated team of conservators found themselves standing directly over the fault line, holding the very instrument that was causing the earth to shift. The symbol, still not fully revealed, was already casting a long disruptive shadow over the present. The pressure was immense, a silent, relentless force, threatening to crush both the discovery and the discoverers beneath its weight. Yet, with each passing day, the symbol grew clearer, its silent call to truth growing louder, making retreat an increasingly impossible choice. The antagonist, as Thorne had begun to think of it, the entrenched historical establishment, personified by influential scholars and the institutions that benefited from the established narrative, began to mount a more direct and overt defense. The subtle jabs and veiled criticisms transformed into calculated attacks, designed to undermine the team's credibility and halt their progress. It was no longer a question of gentle academic disagreement. The stakes had been raised, and the guardians of the old narrative were prepared to fight to maintain their grip on history. This resistance manifested in several forms, each more aggressive than the last. A prominent historian, known for his definitive work on the artifact's historical period, published a scathing critique of the team's methodology in a leading academic journal. The article, filled with condescending language and thinly veiled accusations of incompetence, questioned the team's expertise, their objectivity, and even their motives. It painted them as reckless iconoclasts, driven by a desire for attention rather than a genuine pursuit of historical truth. The article was strategically timed to coincide with a crucial funding review for the project, casting a long shadow over the team's future. Simultaneously, whispers began to circulate within the museum's board of trustees, questioning the project's value and its potential to damage the museum's reputation. Anonymous letters, filled with unsubstantiated claims about the team's radical agenda, they were sent to key members of the board, fueling their anxieties and creating an atmosphere of distrust. Thorne suspected that these letters originated from within the institution itself, planted by individuals who stood to lose the most if the old narrative was overturned. The most insidious attack came in the form of misinformation. A series of articles, published on obscure websites and social media platforms, began to spread false information about the artifact's condition and the team's intentions. These articles claimed that the cleaning process was damaging the artifact, that the team was fabricating evidence to support their preconceived theories, and even that the symbol was a modern forgery, deliberately planted to create controversy. The articles were riddled with inaccuracies and distortions, but they were effective in stirring up public outrage and sowing seeds of doubt in the minds of those who were unfamiliar with the details of the project. Thorne, watching these attacks unfold, felt a surge of anger and frustration. His initial calm professionalism began to erode, replaced by a steely resolve. He had always approached his work with a meticulous, dispassionate objectivity, but the blatant attempts to discredit his team and suppress the truth ignited a fire within him. He lost his last vestiges of patience for the obstructive tactics of the historical establishment. He saw their actions not as a defense of established knowledge, but as a desperate attempt to cling to power, to protect their reputations and their livelihoods at the expense of historical truth. In their desperation to defend the old narrative, the antagonist committed several grave errors. Their eagerness to discredit the team led them to misinterpret early leaks of information, making unfounded accusations that were easily refuted. The historian who published the scathing critique, for example, based his analysis on outdated photographs of the artifact, failing to account for the progress the team had made in revealing the symbol. This glaring oversight undermined his credibility and exposed his bias. Furthermore, their attempts to manipulate public opinion backfired. The more aggressively they attacked the team, the more people began to question their motives. The public, initially swayed by the misinformation, began to see through the smoke and mirrors, recognizing the desperate tactics of those who were trying to suppress the truth. The symbol itself, now significantly clearer, acted as a powerful, silent counterargument to their claims. Its undeniable presence challenged the old narrative in a way that no amount of spin or distortion could overcome. Thorne realized that the full revelation of the symbol would not be a quiet academic announcement, but a seismic, confrontational event. The stakes were too high, the opposition too entrenched for a peaceful resolution. He and his team were not just uncovering a hidden symbol, they were challenging the very foundations of historical understanding, and the forces that had long controlled that understanding were not going to surrender without a fight. Despite the mounting pressure and the personal toll, Thorne felt a sense of exhilaration. He knew that he was on the verge of a profound discovery, a revelation that would reshape our understanding of the past. He was prepared to face the consequences, to weather the storm of controversy, and to defend the truth, no matter the cost. The symbol, now almost fully revealed, beckoned him forward. a silent promise of a new historical dawn. The team was ready, their resolve strengthened by the very opposition they faced. They would not be silenced, they would not be deterred, and they would not rest until the world knew the truth that lay hidden beneath the surface of the ancient artifact. The battle lines were drawn, and the fight for history was about to begin. The final phase began with a palpable tension that hung heavy in the air, thicker than the dust motes dancing in the sterile light of the lab. Dr. Thorne, his face etched with a mixture of exhaustion and fierce determination, held the delicate swab, his hand steady as a surgeon's. Weeks had bled into months, each meticulous stroke of the brush, each gentle application of solvent, peeling back layers of grime, varnish, and historical assumption. The artifact, once a familiar object shrouded in the comfortable cloak of established knowledge, now felt alien, pulsating with an untold secret beneath its surface. The team, a tight-knit unit forged in the crucible of shared purpose and external scrutiny, huddled around, their breath held captive in their chests, eyes fixed on Thorne's every movement, on the emerging patterns. This was not merely the removal of dirt. It was an archaeological excavation on a microscopic scale, a journey through time compressed into the delicate interplay of cotton and ancient pigment. Each conservator felt the weight of history, not just the history they were uncovering, but the history they were about to rewrite. The faint outline, which had once been a tantalizing whisper, had grown into a distinct shape, but its full form remained partially obscured, a final veil protecting its profound truth. Thorne leaned closer, his magnifying visor reflecting the intense concentration in his eyes. He applied a new, milder solution, specifically formulated after countless tests, designed to lift the final stubborn layer without causing the slightest damage. The room was silent, save for the almost imperceptible whisper of the swab against the ancient surface. Then, with a final, almost ethereal shimmer, the last vestiges of obscurity dissolved. It wasn't a gradual reveal. It was an explosion of clarity, an instantaneous blossoming of form that left the entire team gasping. The hidden symbol was fully, unmistakably, and undeniably revealed in its entirety. It was not an interpretation, a shadow, or a speculative anomaly. It was a clear, deliberate mark, etched with an astonishing precision that defied its long concealment. The air in the lab, which had been so heavy with anticipation, now crackled with an electrifying energy. A sudden, profound silence punctuated by the rapid intake of breath. This was the shocking revelation that shattered decades, perhaps centuries, of accepted historical understanding surrounding the artifact and its era. The symbol was not a random doodle, nor a later addition by a less skilled hand. It was an integral part of the original design, purposefully concealed yet meticulously crafted, suggesting a level of intentionality that sent shivers down their spines. The immediate impact on the expert team was a kaleidoscope of raw, overwhelming emotions. Awe, pure and unadulterated, washed over them as they gazed upon something no human eye had consciously registered for millennia. Disbelief warred with their scientific training, struggling to reconcile this undeniable truth with everything they had ever known. Triumph surged through Thorne, a heady rush of vindication after enduring months of doubt, criticism, and immense pressure. But beneath the elation, a chilling realization began to settle in. The sheer, terrifying magnitude of their discovery. This extreme action of truth emerging from obscurity caused an irreversible shift in the narrative, not just for the artifact itself, but potentially for an entire civilization's history. The symbol was an elegant, complex glyph, unlike anything previously documented in the known iconography of that period. It wasn't merely decorative, it was clearly ideographic, a compact language unto itself. Its form was a graceful intertwining of three distinct elements: a stylized avian wing, suggesting flight or transcendence, a coiled serpent representing wisdom or primal power, and at its heart a radiant, almost star-like core, emanating lines that seemed to suggest connection or dispersion. The colors, once hidden beneath the grime, were now vibrant. A deep indigo contrasting with shimmering gold accents, a palette far more sophisticated than the crude pigments often attributed to that era. Its placement on the artifact was equally significant. It wasn't relegated to a corner or an obscure edge. It was centrally located, subtly integrated into what had previously been interpreted as a purely abstract pattern, a masterstroke of camouflage that had fooled generations of scholars. The intricate design spoke of a sophisticated culture, a people with a cosmology and a system of belief far more complex and nuanced than the simplistic portrayals found in existing historical texts. The symbol spoke for itself, a silent, eloquent testament to a hidden truth. It rendered previous explanations obsolete, turning established theories into quaint fables. It demanded a complete re-evaluation of the past, forcing historians, archaeologists, and cultural anthropologists to dismantle cherished assumptions and reconstruct a narrative from the ground up. The implications were staggering. If this symbol, so clearly integral, had been deliberately hidden, what else had been obscured? What other truths lay buried beneath layers of time, misinterpretation, or perhaps even intentional suppression? The artifact, once a familiar pillar of history, had become a portal to an entirely new understanding, a Rosetta Stone for a forgotten chapter. Thorne felt a profound sense of responsibility, not just to the artifact, but to the truth it now so boldly proclaimed. The quiet triumph in the lab quickly morphed into a sober understanding of the monumental task ahead. They had opened a door, but now they had to walk through it, into an unknown historical landscape, ready to confront the storm that was surely brewing outside the sanctuary of their lab. The symbol, radiant and defiant, was no longer a secret. It was a challenge hurled across time, demanding that the world finally listen. The battle to integrate this new knowledge, to rewrite history, had only just begun. The profound silence in the lab was not one of peace, but the quiet before a global earthquake. The world did not merely react to the revelation. It erupted. The news, initially a carefully managed release from the museum, exploded across every conceivable platform with a ferocity that caught even Thorne and his team unprepared. What had been a contained academic tremor quickly became a global earthquake, sending shockwaves through cultural institutions, political chambers, and countless homes. Frantic, sensational media coverage dominated headlines, news tickers, and social media feeds. Every major network carried the story, dissecting the symbol, interviewing bewildered historians, and speculating wildly about its implications. The artifact, once revered in quiet academic circles, was now a household name. Its newly revealed mark, a viral sensation, a meme, a symbol of historical disruption. Urgent international academic conferences were convened almost overnight. Virtual and in-person gatherings scrambling to discuss the unprecedented implications. Scholars who had spent their entire careers building upon the old narrative now found their life's work either validated in unexpected ways or, more often, fundamentally challenged. Debates raged, not just in ivory towers, but in public forums, on television panels, and across the internet, drawing in not only experts but also passionate citizens, amateur historians, and even conspiracy theorists. The symbol, in its stark simplicity, became a focal point for every displaced theory, every historical grievance, and every suppressed narrative. The political implications were equally profound, weaving a complex tapestry of national pride, historical claims, and cultural identity. Nations whose foundational myths or historical timelines were implicitly or explicitly tied to the old understanding of the artifact suddenly found themselves in a precarious position. Diplomatic communiques were exchanged, cultural attachés issued statements, and leaders grappled with how to address a discovery that threatened to rewrite portions of their national story. Some governments embraced the shift, seeing an opportunity to align with a new, more accurate history. Others dug in their heels, attempting to minimize the symbol's impact or even discredit the findings, fearing the destabilizing effect on their established narratives. The symbol, once a silent mark, now roared with the power to reshape geopolitical landscapes, challenging the very fabric of how societies understood their origins and their place in the world. Thorne and his team, once cloistered in their lab, now found themselves at the epicenter of this global storm. Their faces, once known only to a select few in the conservation world, were plastered across newspapers and screens. The whirlwind of reactions from their family, neighbors, or social circle was overwhelming. His own family, initially proud but somewhat detached from the intricacies of his work, now found themselves fielding calls from curious friends and acquaintances, trying to explain the unexplainable. His next-door neighbor, a retired history teacher who had always spoken of the artifact with a familiar reverence, now approached Thorne with a look of bewildered awe, a silent question in his eyes about everything he thought he knew. The global academic community, which had once been a source of both support and subtle judgment, was now a fractured landscape of fervent allies, staunch detractors, and hesitant fence-sitters. Colleagues from other departments who had previously maintained a polite distance now sought out Thorne with a mixture of congratulations, skepticism, and genuine intellectual curiosity. Some offered their expertise, eager to contribute to the monumental task of re-evaluation. Others, particularly those whose reputations were most directly threatened, continued their quiet campaigns of doubt, albeit with less conviction now that the symbol stood undeniably revealed. The public, a vast and often unpredictable entity, swung between awe, anger, and a voracious hunger for more information, painting the team as either heroes or blasphemers, depending on their own ingrained beliefs. Emotionally, Thorne experienced a complex and overwhelming mix of feelings. There was intense relief, a profound sense of catharsis at having finally brought the truth to light, a truth that had been hidden for so long. The decades of meticulous work, the quiet battles against institutional inertia, the personal sacrifices, all were now profoundly validated. This was not just a professional triumph. It was a vindication of scientific integrity and relentless pursuit of knowledge. He felt a deep, almost spiritual satisfaction in having given voice to a silent, ancient message. Yet, this profound validation was inextricably interwoven with immense shock at the sheer scale of the historical re-evaluation required. The symbol was not a minor footnote. It was a foundational text, demanding a complete rereading of an entire era. The implications stretched further than any of them had dared to imagine, touching upon linguistics, sociology, anthropology, and even religious studies. The initial joy of discovery, a pure, unadulterated elation, was quickly tempered by the daunting realization of the long and arduous battle ahead. This was not the end of a journey, but the chaotic, demanding beginning of another. The weight of responsibility settled upon Thorne's shoulders with a crushing force. It was one thing to make a discovery. It was another entirely to establish and integrate this new truth into mainstream understanding, to dismantle centuries of accepted wisdom and rebuild something more accurate, more complete. He knew that the fight was far from over. Skepticism would persist, entrenched interests would continue to resist, and the sheer inertia of history would be a formidable opponent. The initial euphoria of the reveal gave way to a sober understanding of the immense intellectual and emotional labor that lay ahead. The symbol had been unveiled, but its true meaning, its full impact, and its rightful place in human history still had to be painstakingly forged in the crucible of global discourse. Thorne understood, with a chilling clarity, that their work had only just begun. The initial days after the revelation were a maelstrom, a whirlwind of media demands, academic inquiries, and the relentless pressure to provide immediate answers to questions that had taken centuries to form. Thorne and his team, though exhausted, found themselves propelled forward by an almost superhuman resolve. They understood that the unveiling of the symbol was merely the first volley in a protracted intellectual war. A war not fought with weapons, but with evidence, logic, and the slow, grinding force of peer review. The arduous process of integrating this groundbreaking new truth into established historical understanding began, not with a sudden universal acceptance, but as a prolonged struggle, demanding immense human effort and intellectual courage from every corner of the globe. One of the first, and perhaps most crucial, small victories came in the form of independent verification. Scholars from prestigious institutions in different continents, initially skeptical, began their own analyses of the high-resolution scans and detailed reports Thorne's team had meticulously compiled. Their findings, published in rapid succession in top-tier journals, unequivocally confirmed the symbol's authenticity and the profound implications Thorne had initially outlined. These peer-reviewed research papers, initially met with a mix of academic excitement and some lingering resistance, slowly but surely built an irrefutable bulwark of evidence. Each new publication was a small, hard-won battle, chipping away at the edifice of entrenched belief. Beyond the immediate confirmation, the symbol acted as a powerful intellectual catalyst, forcing a reinterpretation of countless other historical texts and artifacts. What had once been dismissed as anomalies or stylistic quirks in ancient manuscripts now took on startling new significance. Linguistic experts discovered subtle patterns in dead languages that, when viewed through the lens of the symbol's meaning, unlocked entirely new semantic layers. Archaeologists revisited excavation sites with fresh eyes, unearthing previously overlooked fragments that corroborated the symbol's narrative. Historians began the painstaking work of rewriting timelines, re-evaluating power structures, and recontextualizing entire civilizations. The symbol was not just a piece of a puzzle, it was the Rosetta Stone for an entire forgotten epoch, illuminating connections no one had ever dreamed possible. The shifts in public discourse and educational curricula, though slower, were no less significant. Initially, there was widespread sensationalism, followed by a period of confusion and even anger as long-cherished historical myths began to crumble. Textbooks, once considered immutable repositories of truth, now required urgent revisions. Museums grappled with how to present artifacts whose established narratives had been fundamentally challenged. Thorne and his team found themselves on a global lecture circuit, not just presenting their findings, but patiently guiding the public through the often uncomfortable process of intellectual reorientation. It was a delicate dance between educating and reassuring, between dismantling the old and building the new. However, this path was also marked by definitive losses. The most painful, perhaps, was the dismantling of cherished historical myths that had provided comfort and identity to generations. For some, the new truth felt like a betrayal, a stripping away of their cultural heritage. Academically, the loss was starker. Those scholars who had actively suppressed or ignored earlier hints of the truth, or who had vehemently clung to the old paradigm even in the face of overwhelming evidence, saw their academic reputations suffer. Careers built on specific interpretations now found their foundations crumbling. The uncomfortable realization that much of what was believed was fundamentally flawed was a bitter pill for many, exposing the human tendency to prioritize comfort over uncomfortable truth. This wasn't merely about being wrong, it was about the profound moral implications of having resisted new knowledge for so long. Thorne, along with the broader scientific and historical community, underwent a profound emotional reconstruction and maturation. The initial elation of discovery had long since given way to a deeper, more nuanced understanding of their role. They gained a profound self-awareness about the nature of historical inquiry itself, a continuous, iterative process inherently fragile, subject to human bias and the limitations of available evidence. The experience taught them the profound courage required to pursue discovery against entrenched resistance, not just from external forces, but from within their own intellectual traditions. They learned that truth, when it finally emerged, often did so not with a roar, but with a quiet insistence that, once heard, could not be unheard. From the ashes of the old understanding, new academic fields began to emerge, vibrant and dynamic. Interdisciplinary research methodologies, once considered niche or experimental, became the norm, as scholars realized the limitations of siloed knowledge. New departments dedicated to post-symbolic era studies, or recontextualized ancient history, began to form in universities. Innovative public educational initiatives blossomed, leveraging digital platforms and immersive experiences to convey the complexities of the revised history to a global audience. The symbol, in its silent eloquence, had not only rewritten the past but had also reshaped the very future of humanistic inquiry. It marked a new era of understanding, one characterized by humility, open-mindedness, and an unyielding commitment to the relentless pursuit of truth, wherever it might lead. The journey was far from over, but the foundations of a new world, built on a rediscovered truth, were being laid, brick by painstaking brick. The scars of the battle remained, but so too did the strength forged in its fires. The full consequence promised in Part 1, the definitive rewriting of a significant chapter of human history, was now undeniably upon them. It wasn't a swift surgical alteration, but a messy, sprawling reconstruction, like rebuilding a city after an earthquake. The symbol, once a secret whispered only among the conservation team, now resonated in every corner of the globe, its echoes reverberating through academic journals, political debates, and even casual conversations in coffee shops. The impact transcended mere academic understanding. Cultural identities, long anchored to the now discredited narrative, were undergoing a painful but necessary reevaluation. Social narratives, once considered immutable truths, were being challenged and reshaped. Even spiritual beliefs, intertwined with the old historical framework, were being questioned and reinterpreted. The world was grappling with a new past, a past that was both unsettling and exhilarating in its newfound complexity. The antagonist, representing the forces of historical obfuscation and institutional inertia, faced its inevitable moral and social fall. The old theories, once held sacred, were now relegated to footnotes in history books, cautionary tales of intellectual arrogance and willful blindness. The influence of their proponents waned, their voices fading from the forefront of academic discourse. The integrity of those who had actively sought to suppress the truth was publicly questioned, their reputations tarnished by their desperate attempts to cling to a crumbling paradigm. Some offered belated apologies, attempts at damage control that rang hollow in the face of overwhelming evidence. Others remained defiant, clinging to their outdated beliefs with a stubbornness that bordered on delusion. For Thorne and his team, the emotional justice was not a vengeful triumph, but a quiet, profound satisfaction. It was the satisfaction of knowing that they had remained true to their principles, that they had pursued the truth relentlessly, even in the face of immense pressure. It was the satisfaction of seeing their work validated by global acceptance, of witnessing the slow but steady integration of the symbol's meaning into the collective human understanding. There was no gloating, no sense of superiority, only a deep, abiding respect for the power of truth to prevail, however long it might take. The years of doubt, the sleepless nights, the constant battles against skepticism and resistance, all had been worth it. They had changed the world, not through force or coercion, but through the simple act of uncovering a hidden truth. The story concludes not with a bang, but with a quiet, intimate reflection from Thorne. Years later, standing in the now renovated conservation lab, gazing at a high-resolution image of the symbol, he pondered the enduring power of truth, the cyclical nature of discovery and suppression throughout history, and the profound responsibility humanity bears to constantly re-examine its past. He thought of the countless other symbols, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered, waiting to challenge our assumptions and reshape our understanding of the world. He realized that the unveiling of this particular symbol was not an ending, but a beginning, a catalyst for a new era of intellectual humility and relentless inquiry. He understood that every generation had a duty to question the narratives they inherited, to challenge the status quo, and to seek out the hidden truths that lay buried beneath layers of dogma and prejudice. The pursuit of knowledge was not a passive acceptance of established wisdom, but an active, ongoing process of critical reevaluation. It required courage, integrity, and a willingness to challenge one's own beliefs. The symbol had taught them that even the most deeply entrenched historical narratives could be overturned by a single, undeniable truth. Thorne also reflected on the human cost of discovery. He thought of the careers that had been ruined, the reputations that had been tarnished, the friendships that had been broken in the wake of the symbol's revelation. He understood that the pursuit of truth often came at a price, and that the responsibility for minimizing that cost rested on the shoulders of those who sought to uncover it. He hoped that the future would be marked by greater intellectual humility, by a greater willingness to embrace new discoveries, and by a more compassionate understanding of those who clung to outdated beliefs. Finally, Thorne considered the legacy of the symbol. He knew that it would continue to be studied, debated, and reinterpreted for generations to come. Its meaning would evolve, its implications would expand, and its impact on human history would continue to unfold. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he had played a small part in this ongoing process of discovery, that he had contributed to the ever-evolving story of humanity. The audience is left in silence, contemplating the immense weight of this epic journey of revelation and the lasting impact of a hidden symbol finally brought to light. The screen fades to black, leaving only the faint echo of the symbol's silent message: question everything, seek the truth, and never stop exploring the mysteries of the past. The journey of discovery is never truly over. It is a continuous, unending quest for understanding.